Last year, 74% of people living with low income faced a civil legal problem, but they only sought legal help for 1 out of 4 of those problems. And for the problems that had a substantial impact on their lives, people received the legal help they needed only 8% of the time. Our friends and neighbors are navigating alone in the civil justice system, where they have to resolve critical problems relating to housing and family law and debt. And they're on an unfair playing field. Before the pandemic, only 5% of tenants had an attorney when they were facing an eviction, yet 83% of landlords were represented. In consumer debt collection cases, only 2% of debtors have legal representation, and 99% of creditors are represented by an attorney. Recognizing this alarming situation, in May of 2019, the Michigan Supreme Court created the Justice for All Task Force to do 2 things: assess the current state of the civil justice system and develop a strategic action plan to ensure 100% access to justice. In 2021, the court established the Justice for All Commission to implement that plan. Former Chief Justice Bridget McCormick defined the mission of the JFA Commission, declaring, "All Michigan residents must have equal access to our courts and to resources needed to navigate our justice system, regardless of who they are, what they earn, or where they come from." In today's episode of Legally Speaking, we'll be talking to the Justice for All Commission Chair and Vice Chair. They'll explain the Commission's efforts to ensure that all Michigan residents, regardless of their background or income, have equal access to our civil justice system. We'll be right back. Today on Legally Speaking, we're talking about the Justice for All Commission, and we're fortunate to have the chair and the vice chair who are going to talk about that commission's mission to ensure 100% access to justice in the state of Michigan. Justice Brian Zahra is the chair of the JFA Commission. Justice Zahra began his career at the Dickinson Wright Law Firm, where he worked until he was appointed to first the Circuit Court, then the Appellate Court, and then ultimately the Michigan Supreme Court in 2011. Justice Zahra has spent his career at the Supreme Court working to improve the administration of justice in Michigan. And he has worked on a long list of projects. He's worked to improve the civil jury instructions and work on domestic violence legislation implementation. In 2019, Justice Zahra was appointed to lead the Justice for All Task Force, and in 2021, to chair the Justice for All Commission. Justice Zahra, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
And Angela Tripp is the vice chair of the Justice for All Commission. She's the director of the Michigan Legal Help Program, which runs a nationally recognized michiganlegalhelp.org website, which is to support self-represented litigants. And they support self-help centers throughout the state of Michigan. And just great to have you.
It's so great to be here. Thank you so much, Ashley.
Thanks. So I think it would be useful to start with a definition of what the civil justice system is, because I don't think a lot of people know what I'm saying when I say that. Angela, do you want to take a stab at defining that system?
Sure. The civil justice system, one easy way to describe it is that it is not the criminal system. A lot of people know what the criminal system is from television and personal experience. Civil justice is kind of everything else. When it could be family law, divorce, custody, paternity, child support. It could be eviction. It could be debt collection. It could be a personal protection order. It could also be a name change or an adoption. So it's sort of it's disagreements between people rather than the state against a person. So that's how I think of it.
That's great. And then that whole system, so when people are accessing that system, obviously it's about the courts, but are there other parts to that system that people interact with?
There are so many parts of the system. The courts are there. In some cases, instead of a court, though, it might be an administrative agency. So sort of like if you're receiving unemployment and there's a problem with that, you're not working in a court, you're working with an agency. Same with food assistance or cash assistance from DHHS. There are also legal aid organizations that do more than just represent people, but also work on task forces with courts. And in task forces and things like that, there are also community organizations that do a lot of work, either helping people through their civil legal problems or providing other forms of assistance that can help people resolve their legal problems.
Great, great, thank you. And so let's talk about the Justice for All Task Force, which is how the whole process began. And Justice Zahra, can you talk about why Michigan got involved in this whole movement on
Sure.
Justice for All?
Then Chief Justice McCormick called me and said that she'd just come back from the conference, the National Conference of Chief Justices, and they were talking about the last conference of the National Conference of State Court Administrators. And the discussion was the civil justice gap, how we have so many people who have legal issues, sometimes legal problems, sometimes legal issues, sometimes legal claims, but things that relate to the law in the civil justice area, and they don't have access to an attorney or access to information to help them proceed on their own. And the various states through these organizations committed to putting together a Justice for All group, task force, commission, whatever you want to name it, to try to address this with the goal, albeit aspirational, of making sure that everyone, 100% of the people who have a legal issue, will be able to get some information to help them resolve their problem. Perhaps it's a lawyer through legal aid or pro bono services of a law firm, or perhaps it's through Michigan Legal Help, where they can go and gain access to understand their claim.
And so I know when the task force got started, there was a lot of work in the community. There were surveys and listening sessions. And can you talk a little bit about that, what was happening with that effort?
Absolutely. The National Center for State Courts has developed a framework for how states can do this Justice for All analysis and strategic plan, and we followed that framework, and we had the task force had about 20 members on it, and they worked in smaller groups and did the things that you mentioned, and they also held focus groups. And our mission was to first map the civil justice system resources, but also while we were doing that to identify gaps and barriers. And so with that information, we took an inventory of what we have and what we need. And then as a group, we came together with a facilitator and took all that information and made it into a strategic plan. This is our plan of attack on the justice gap, and that is the document that the Justice for All Commission has followed.
And so we've talked a lot on this show and in other environments about the justice gap, right? Like there's just not enough lawyers to represent the people who need them, and mostly people who can't afford lawyers. And so that's a barrier. There's not enough funding to pay for legal aid lawyers. What other barriers did the task force kind of suss out that were problems?
The inventory identified multiple forms of barriers. Some of them, as you mentioned, are clear and obvious, and others of them were less obvious. And so there was it led to a focus on making our courthouses more welcoming. And the inventory lifted up that people sometimes just wouldn't go to court. They would rather ignore their legal problem, deal with the consequences, than go into a courthouse that is unfamiliar and intimidating and scary, and maybe they struggled to get there because of public transportation, or maybe even once they got there, they weren't able to stay for their hearing because even though they were told it was at 9 o'clock, they weren't actually in front of the judge until 1 p.m. And so we looked at things, like it brought up things like the way hearings are scheduled and the way courthouses operate. Are sometimes barriers to access to justice. And courts can't solve the problem of public transportation, but they can operate in a way to lessen the burden of a lack of public transportation to get to a court, for example. And just knowing about the problem and thinking about the problem.
Well, we also discovered that many people have civil justice issues, but they don't recognize them as such. Mm-hmm. They have problems in their life, and they don't realize that perhaps the solution is through a legal process. And so educating them as to what their rights are or what their claims are and the process they have to go through to address them is another major hurdle that we have to take on.
So let's talk about that next step. So the Justice for All Task Force identified these barriers and issues and then created a plan that how we can move forward in ensuring or getting closer to justice for all. What's been going on with that? What's the process? I think people might want to know what's happening with that.
Okay, well, we created a commission, and it's from not just lawyers, right? But many non-lawyers, and across the community, across various aspects of our state. And from that commission, put people into work groups or committees, very defined in specific areas, and asked them to come back with their ideas and solutions, which will be presented to the commission. The commission will then, in turn, present them to the Supreme Court for us to take action.
And Justice Zahra, you mentioned that it's not just lawyers who are on these work groups. Why is that so important?
Well, the problems, the people who don't know that they have problems are obviously not lawyers. And the people who are in need of legal assistance aren't lawyers. Lawyers can represent themselves, right? So getting to a broad spectrum of the community, of the people of our state who are in need of assistance was critical to us being able to then define the issues before we drew up a plan to address the civil justice gap.
So
Can I add to that?
Sure.
Yeah.
One of the other things that the task force report and strategic plan lifted up was that that a lot of good work was being done to advance civil justice access, but it was being done in silos. And so people, like different, like the court was doing this, and the legal aid organizations were doing this, and maybe the clerks were doing this. And so one of the other reasons it's so important to have the broad spectrum of people is to sort of break down those silos and bring in, many people might have ideas about how to improve forms than the people who work at the State Court Administrative Office. And so we want to bring them to the table and say, tell us your good ideas on how to improve forms. And so that's one of the core things about the Justice for All Commission, is that we're actively working across sectors and silos.
If you're in the State Court Administrative Office and you've seen these forms your entire career, they don't seem difficult to you.
Right.
So you have to get the perspective of those who are looking at them for the first time. If you've worked in the courthouse your entire career, it's not intimidating to you. But if you're going there for the first time to address your traffic ticket or a small claims matter, your heart's pumping 1,000 beats a minute, you're greeted at the door, the first thing you see is a metal detector and someone asking you to take off your belt and empty your pockets. It's very intimidating. And so getting people to come together to discuss how they view the work other people are doing and the needs in those areas have proved very productive.
Right, and recognizing, right, that the people who are coming into the court systems and they're trying to figure out those problems, these are very important problems in their lives.
Correct.
And for those of us who do this for our living, it's part of our everyday and our work, and it's not the most important thing. But recognizing that, and I think for every one of the players in the system to understand that this is maybe the most important day in somebody's life, and they're met with the metal detector,
right,
and they're taking off your shoes. Right. Well, let's talk about what's happening now. So the commission is set up, and there's work groups happening. What will people start to see as the work gets done and it goes through all the processes of the commission? What kind of things is the commission working out that will have an impact on people's lives?
Well, I'll start with reimagining courthouses.
Perfect.
Because for me, when I heard of that committee, it reminded me of my very first time of going to court as a college student to address a ticket that I had. And I thought, well, I want to go to law school. This should be relatively easy. But from the time I got there, I was intimidated from the walking in to trying to understand who the court clerk was, to who the attorney was that would be representing the city. And then when the judge would call me up and ask me to talk, I could barely get my words out. So in the area of reimagining courthouses, we're thinking of, outside the box, perhaps a greeter, someone there who can help you to direct you to where you need to go. We have self-help centers and Michigan Legal Help. Perhaps we have a kiosk right there in the courthouse so that when you get there, you can obtain information that perhaps you didn't bring with you, or were aware of prior to getting to court. So that's one area. We have reports coming in landlord-tenant debt collection. I don't know if you'd want to talk about one of those.
Sure. There will be, we with the assistance of the Pew Charitable Trust, we did research and recommendations related to both debt collection and eviction. The eviction report is not out yet, but the debt collection one is. And from that, it might be hard for people to see, but when they go to court, the processes and procedures will be changed in a way that will make it a more fair place to decide, for the court to decide what's happening. So we are proposing some changes to court rules and forms, both so that when people receive information about a debt collection case filed against them, they'll have better information. They'll know who, they'll have more information about who the original creditor was. They'll have more information about what they should do to protect their own rights, and that will come with that first mailing from the court. So again, just trying to, one of my other things that I talk about a lot with Justice for All is that, we know we can't get a lawyer for every person. So one of our other avenues is trying to make the system work so that you don't need a lawyer to navigate it. So, making the debt collection process easier to understand and more fair for people that don't have legal education or background.
I think that is a really important piece. On our hotline, we spend a lot of times asking people to read us their forms and then say, this is what this means. Mm-hmm. What this means is, and so some of the work you're talking about is making forms that people, when they see them, are meaningful, and they know, I know these are my next steps I have to take, and this is what this is about.
That's a very significant reform. I can tell you, even as a lawyer, I practiced in the circuit court with breach of contracts and personal injury matters. Rarely ever went to district court and if I went to district court to help a family member or a friend or on a pro bono case and they handed me a district court form on landlord-tenant, as a lawyer I'd look at it, I wasn't sure what to put in there. So I can only imagine an untrained person, when they see that form, they're completely lost. So the work we're doing to make the forms in plain English and easy to understand will significantly reduce the civil justice gap.
I agree, and one of the things that we're trying to overhaul all the forms and kind of the process by which they get made, but my favorite part of the forms improvement process is that we do usability testing. And so we go out into the community and we meet with ordinary people and we ask them a couple of questions to kind of gauge, is the form conveying the information that it needs to? Does the form say to them, like, your landlord is trying to evict you and what do you need to do next? And so that's one of those examples of getting other people at the table. And if they say, this part right here, I have no idea what this part means, then we know we need to spend extra time working on that part to make it understandable.
Like maybe at the part where it's the address and the phone number of the court, and people get bogged down in the top part of the form instead of what the heck this form is supposed to be telling me to do. Mm-hmm.
And using things like, instead of just saying plaintiff and defendant, saying plaintiff/landlord. Defendant/tenant, so that it's very clear, because most people, plaintiff and defendant doesn't really mean a whole lot, but they know if they're renting a house, they know that they are the tenant and they know who the landlord is, typically.
Right, so language that people actually use in their day-to-day life is going to be incorporated into those forms. Mm-hmm. And Angela, you said something a few minutes ago about making the system better for people who can't get a lawyer. So as we're talking about the justice gap, I often think, we need more lawyers. We need more lawyers to do this work, and then if we could get enough lawyers, we could represent the people who needed it. And can you talk about why that can't be the only solution that we go for?
It's just not possible. I remember being at a conference a few years ago, and someone had done the math on what it would take to get one legal aid lawyer to give every person who needed it 1 hour of legal assistance, and it would be like a 1,000% increase in funding for LSC, and it would take every pro bono attorney doing 800 hours of work a year to meet the need. And it's just, the numbers aren't possible. There aren't actually enough lawyers available to do that, and so
most lawyers don't even know that, right?
It's
but
true.
Before getting involved in this, I was very active when I was in private practice at Dickinson Wright in the pro bono committee. And we did a lot of good work, and I thought, well, every firm is doing pro bono work, and we have legal aid, and we're filling the gap. But then when I became a judge in the circuit court, every week people would come in and they didn't have an attorney. So I thought, well, this is easy. I'll call legal aid, or I'll call the firm, and it's shocking how difficult it is to match people up with lawyers. And I've come to the conclusion there simply cannot be done by adding more lawyers or throwing more money at it. We have to think outside the box, and we have to find other ways to provide the knowledge people can use to give them the best outcome possible for their legal problems.
I often think about it as a continuum. And we typically think that there's two choices. Either you don't have a lawyer or you do, and that's it. But in reality, there are so many other things in the middle, as Justice Zahra mentioned.
And our commission is that middle.
Yeah, yes, we're
Right.
committed to filling out that middle. We can't make more people lawyers, but we can create more self-help resources, and we can create more community navigators who can help people access self-help resources, and we can change structures so that the system is easier to navigate, and we can possibly change structures to enable more people to give the type of help that people need.
Are there other models that you're looking at in terms of, like, are there other systems that have gone the same direction to try to get people help where they need it
Sure.
along the way?
So if we look at the medical field, 20 years ago you'd go and you'd see a doctor. Now, typically if you go to your doctor's office, you are going to see a physician assistant or nurse practitioner to do some initial triage work and perhaps even solve your problem. There's probably room for something like that in the legal system. We've seen that occurring already in Utah and Arizona. In Ontario, they have limited licensed paralegals who, in very defined areas, are able to do the initial triage work and make a determination whether this is a problem that can be solved early on with minimal intervention, or is it something larger that will require counsel to be there. So that type of regulatory reform. And oftentimes I encounter lawyers say, oh, what are you doing? This is really going to harm our profession. But what we have to remember is that we're talking about this gap of people, this group of people who are in a position where they simply cannot afford the legal services or cannot to the extent that is required. So they need some sort of middle of the road gap. We tried with limited license, limited scope representation. That is where previously a lawyer who took on a case, they had to take on the entire case and couldn't get out of the case. Now we've changed the rule, so if you've got a case, a small claims or a district court action, and it doesn't justify retaining a lawyer because of the amount in controversy, you can say to the lawyer, please write this brief for me, and then I'll take it from there. So we're doing things like that, and I really don't think it's going to inhibit the practice of law for lawyers. I think it's really going to make it flourish.
So that there's different ways for lawyers to get involved in a case that might be the best fit for their client.
Correct.
And I think one of the things that I'm hearing is people need different things, but sometimes it's also empowering, right, for someone to do their own case. And while it may be intimidating to walk into that courtroom, if you have the tools, it may be kind of a life-changing process to be able to go in and say, I'm going to do this. I have what I need, and I can go in and do this on my own.
Absolutely. When I talk about Michigan Legal Help, I talk about why we do what we do. We give people the education, the information that they need, the forms that they need, the tools that they need, but we also give them the confidence to stand up in court. Knowing, once you kind of know what to expect and what is expected of you, when you walk in, you have that confidence, and that confidence can really be the difference between having a good day or a bad day, being successful in handling your legal problem, and feeling like you've been just run over by the court.
Our goal is not to make sure that everyone who doesn't have legal information can win their case. That's simply not possible. But what we want them to do is to feel good about getting the best result under the circumstances that they could get. Not all claims are winnable. We can't send Perry Mason in to win every case. But if you understand what your rights are, and you understand what the law is, and where you stand, you might be able to come to peace with yourself in reaching a resolution that makes all sides happy.
I know in my experience as a legal aid lawyer, when clients felt like their voice was heard in a meaningful way, they felt good about the process and thought it was administering justice even if they lost. That their
Yes.
voice was heard and it was a fair process, and so that was what they needed to move forward. And
That's the goal of the Justice for All Commission.
right, is letting people have their voice heard in the way that is the most meaningful
Yes.
and appropriate for their needs.
And kind of giving them the best chance, giving them the best chance to reach the best outcome, giving them some input and kind of control over the situation that they might not without some assistance.
Right. Angela, can you talk just for a second about Michigan Legal Help and what's available now for folks to access?
Sure, absolutely. We have MichiganLegalHelp.org is the URL. We have a lot of information on family law, housing law, consumer, public assistance, expungement, tax, even more areas than that. And we have information that people can read. We have do-it-yourself tools that help people easily and properly complete the legal forms that they need to move their case forward or to respond to a case against them. We have step-by-step instructions. So if you want to do a name change, we don't just give you things to read, we give you the forms and then step-by-step instructions on everything that you need to do to get from the start to the finish of your legal problem. We also make referrals to legal aid programs, community organizations. Depending on people's individual needs, we help connect them with the resources that are available to them. And we work with self-help centers located in courthouses and libraries and community agencies where people can go to access the internet and also get assistance from navigators. So we try a lot of different ways to help people no matter where they are in their legal problem, no matter what their current understanding is, and if they need more help, to connect them to that additional help.
And I would think that after some of the changes have been made with the Justice for All Commission, that there'll be a lot of changes to that resource too. Right,
Absolutely.
that are reflective.
We keep up with all the changes. We're very connected to the State Court Administrative Office, so we always know when a new form is coming, and we're on top of all the changes. And we have attorneys who work every day to make sure everything is up to date on that website.
Michigan Legal Help was one of the national leaders in online assistance. And we're very proud of that. And you should be very proud of all the work you've done there.
Thank
the
you.
Justice for All Commission is going to enhance their work and make it even more accessible for people.
Great. Well, Justice Zahra, Angela, thank you so much for coming today and talking about this really, really important work. And thanks to all of you for joining us on Legally Speaking.